Jax Markov hated Mondays. Not that days meant much on the lunar colony. The sun didn't rise or set, it just hung there like a cosmic timeout indicator, reminding everyone they were stuck in some interstellar detention hall. Jax's boots clanked against the metal walkway, the sound echoing through the empty corridor like a death knell. He rubbed his eyes, still crusty from a sleep that felt more like a coma. "Another day, another asteroid," he muttered. "You talking to yourself again, Jax?" came a voice from behind, sharp enough to cut through the thick atmosphere. It was Tressa Vin, the colony's leader, or, as she preferred, the one who gets blamed when things go south. "What can I say, boss? I'm excellent company," Jax replied, not bothering to turn around. "Morning pep talks are the only thing keeping me from jumping out an airlock." "Well, don't get too comfortable, sunshine. We've got a new decree from the overlords," Tressa said, slipping into the seat beside him at the communal table. Her expression was as grim as ever, a permanent fixture on her face. "No sarcasm." Jax raised an eyebrow. "You're kidding, right? Does this face look like it's kidding?" She gestured to her own visage, which had about as much humor as a black hole. "Well, that's it then. We're screwed," Jax said, letting out a sigh that could power a small wind turbine. "What's next?" "Banning breathing." Tressa looked at him with a glint of amusement in her eyes. Wouldn't put it past them. The them in question were the Slav alien overseers with all the charm of a plague of locusts. They'd shown up one solar cycle ago, claimed ownership of the moon and its resources, and set themselves up as the benevolent dictators of humanity's last stand. Benevolent, in the way a cat is benevolent to a mouse. "So, what's the plan, fearless leader?" Jax asked, cracking his knuckles. "Going to write them a strongly worded letter, more like a mildly amused email," Tressa replied. "We keep our heads down, follow orders, and maybe they don't vaporize us." Jax chuckled darkly. Ever the optimist. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the oxygen recyclers. It was a sound that had become comforting in its monotony, like the ticking of an old clock. "Think they'll actually enforce it?" Jax asked. "You bet your ass they will. They've got punishments lined up like a kid collecting action figures," Tressa said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Rumor has it they've got a machine that can detect sarcasm," Jax snorted. "Great. We're living in a bad sci-fi comedy." "I wish it was just bad. It's positively atrocious," Tressa replied, leaning back in her chair. "But it's our reality." The room buzzed with the chatter of miners coming in for their shifts, a symphony of complaints and grumbling. Jax nodded to a few familiar faces, each one wearing the same uniform of tired eyes and weary smiles. "Hey, Jax," one of the miners called out, a burly man named Ludo with arms thicker than tree trunks. "Heard they're giving out medals for the best sarcasm." "Sorry, pal." "Looks like your award speech just got cancelled," Jax shot back. "Damn shame," Ludo replied, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "Keep your head down, Ludo," Tressa advised. "The Slav are watching. Let 'em watch. Maybe they'll learn how to have a sense of humor," Ludo said, his voice a low rumble. "Yeah, and maybe pigs will fly," Jax added. "Or, we could just grow wings." Tressa stood up, dusting off her hands. "All right, gentlemen, let's try not to get ourselves exterminated today. We've got rocks to break and quotas to meet." "You always know how to brighten a room, boss," Jax said, getting to his feet. "Flattery will get you everywhere," Tressa replied dryly. As they dispersed to their duties, Jax couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The decree was just another brick in the wall, another way to crush whatever spirit humanity had left. But hey, he thought, at least they hadn't banned the crappy food. Yet, the mining bay was a cavernous space, filled with the noise of machinery and the smell of sweat. Jax grabbed his equipment, the weight of the tools familiar and reassuring. He spotted his colleague, Dario, fiddling with his helmet. "Hey, Dario," Jax called out. "Heard you got a new girlfriend. What's she like?" Dario grinned. "She's great. Real quiet, doesn't talk back," Jax laughed. "Inflatable, is she?" "Nah, just imaginary," Dario replied with a wink. Strapping on his helmet, Jax joined the line of miners waiting to descend into the tunnels. The lift creaked and groaned as it carried them down, deeper into the moon's crust. Jax watched the rock walls slide by, his mind wandering to what lay beyond. "Think we'll ever get out of here?" Dario asked, breaking the silence. "Only if the Slarv decide they are bored of us," Jax replied, "or if they find a new species to torment." "Cheery thought," Dario said. "I'm full of him," Jax answered, tightening his grip on the rail as the lift jolted to a stop. The tunnels were a maze of steel and stone, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that flickered ominously. They split into teams, each group heading to their assigned sectors. Jax was paired with Ludo, a convenient arrangement given they both enjoyed a healthy disregard for authority. "Let's see what treasure awaits," Ludo said, swinging his pickaxe with unnecessary gusto. "Probably more rocks," Jax replied, chipping away at the wall. "But maybe if we're lucky, we'll find some alien artifact," Ludo grinned. "And here I thought you didn't believe in miracles." "Only the kind that come with a paycheck," Jax said. Although I'd settle for less crap food in the cafeteria. As they worked, the hours slipped by like sand through an hourglass, each grain a reminder of how long they'd been prisoners here. Jax wiped the sweat from his brow, leaning against the cool rock. "So what's the plan if they start cracking down on us?" Ludo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jax shrugged. "We do what humans always do: survive, adapt. And when the time's right, we fight back." Ludo nodded. "I like the sound of that." "Yeah, well, keep it under wraps," Jax said. "The Slarv might not understand sarcasm, but they sure as hell know how to squash a rebellion." The day dragged on, each swing of the pickaxe echoing the frustrations of the miners. As Jax and Ludo headed back to the surface, the weight of the decree hung over them like a storm cloud. Back in the communal area, Tressa was waiting, a grim look on her face. "Got some news," she said, waving them over. "Good or bad?" Jax asked, though he already knew the answer. "What do you think?" Tressa replied, her tone as dry as the lunar dust. "Hit us with it," Ludo said. "The Slarv are planning a visit," Tressa said. "A big one. They want to observe us, see how we're adjusting." Jax laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Adjusting, like adjusting to a bed of nails." "Exactly," Tressa said. "They'll be here tomorrow, so try to be on your best behavior." "Oh, I'll be a model citizen," Jax said, the sarcasm oozing from his voice. "Just remember, they're not here for a chat," Tressa said, her eyes scanning the room. "They're looking for anything they can use against us." As the group dispersed, Jax couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over him. The Slarv's visit was a ticking time bomb, one wrong move away from disaster. He lay down in his bunk, staring up at the ceiling, wondering what fresh hell tomorrow would bring. And as he drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in his mind. How long could humanity keep playing by the rules of a game they never asked to play? Jax Markov's alarm beeped like a dying canary. He swatted it off the shelf, watching it bounce across the gritty floor before it surrendered to silence. The room was a claustrophobic box, all metal and utilitarian, the lunar colony's attempt at cozy. He rolled out of bed with all the enthusiasm of a cow heading for the slaughterhouse and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. Another day in paradise. "You gonna survive today, champ?" he asked himself in the cracked mirror. The reflection, bleary-eyed and sporting a 5 o'clock shadow that was now 5 days overdue, didn't bother answering. It rarely did. "Rise and shine, ladies and gents," blared the loudspeaker, the cheerful voice of the automated announcement system more annoying than comforting. Jax suspected it was programmed by someone who hated mornings even more than he did. The corridor outside his door was already bustling with miners, each face a grim mask of determination or sheer indifference. Conveyor belts clattered overhead, carrying the fruits of their labor, rocks and more rocks. If he didn't know any better, he'd think he was in hell. A very boring, rock-filled hell. Tressa Vin stood at the junction where the corridors met, arms crossed and face set to commander mode. Her presence was the only thing keeping some semblance of order among the workers, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, except perhaps the surface of the sun. "Morning, Tressa," Jax said. attempting a salute that ended up more like a wave. "What's the damage today?" Same old," Tressa replied tightly. "Except now we've got the Slarv breathing down our necks. Joy of joys. I need everyone on their best behavior." "Why, Tressa, I didn't know you cared," Jax said with a smirk. She sighed, a sound that could have been lifted straight from the world's longest list of grievances. "Just try not to get executed, all right. It's bad for morale." "Don't worry, I'll save my wisecracks for the highlight reel," Jax promised, then made his way towards the lift, joining his fellow miners. The lift was a rattling death trap, but it was their only gateway to the underbelly of this rock. As they descended, Jax struck up a conversation with Ludo, who stood next to him, arms crossed like a bouncer at the gates of Hades. "So you think they'll actually enforce this sarcasm decree?" Jax asked, raising his voice over the clattering of chains. "They're aliens," Ludo grunted. "I'm sure they've got some high-tech way to do it, like zapping us every time we say something snarky." "Oh, like a cosmic shock collar? Great. I've always wanted to be a pet," Jax replied, grinning. "What's next?" "A muzzle. Don't give him ideas," Ludo said, rolling his eyes. The lift shuddered to a stop and they disembarked, a procession of weary souls heading into the labyrinthine tunnels. Jax grabbed his gear from the storage lockers, a pickaxe, drills, and the ever-important lunchbox filled with nutrient paste that tasted like despair. As they set to work, chipping away at the stubborn lunar rock, the reality of their situation weighed heavier than the tools in their hands. The Slarv's decree was no idle threat. Rumor had it anyone caught breaking it would be sent to re-education. Jax had no interest in finding out what that meant. Tressa, meanwhile, was busy trying to mediate the bubbling tensions among the miners. She moved through the tunnels with the efficiency of a commander corralling troops before a battle they were doomed to lose. "All right, listen up," she called out, gathering them during a break. "We've got to keep it together. The Slarv are watching and they're not known for their compassion." "Understatement of the year," Jax muttered to Ludo, who chuckled quietly. "I need you all to remember why we're here, to survive. If we start making waves now, they'll crush us," Tressa continued, her voice steady and commanding. "That means no sarcasm, no smart remarks. Just do your jobs and keep your heads down." "Aye, Captain," a miner shouted from the back, a mocking tone lacing his words. The group laughed, but it was the kind of laughter that masked unease. Jax leaned against the cool stone wall and folded his arms. "And if they start zapping us for thinking sarcastically, what then? Thought police." "Then you better have an empty mind, Jax," Tressa shot back, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Should be easy for you, Jax," Ludo teased, nudging him. "Ha, ha," Jax said dryly. "I'm a regular Socrates over here." As the group dispersed, Jax felt the weight of their grim reality settle back over him. The miners returned to their stations, the sounds of pickaxes striking rock a rhythmic reminder of their confinement. The Slarv were indeed watching. Cameras dotted the tunnels, and every so often, a Slarv drone would buzz by, its mechanical eye scanning the workers with unsettling precision. The decree might have seemed absurd, but the Slarv were nothing if not thorough. Back in the control room, Tressa sat at a terminal, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She was monitoring communications, diverting any unapproved conversations away from the Slarv's prying eyes. It was a dangerous game, but one she played with the skill of someone who had everything to lose. Jax popped his head around the corner. "Hey, Tressa, you think they get cable back on their home planet?" "Maybe they're just bored and using us as entertainment." Tressa looked up, unimpressed. "You volunteering to be their next reality TV star. Depends on the perks," Jax replied. "Do I get a better room?" "Not unless you count a cell as an upgrade," she said, turning back to her screens. "Now, shoo, I've got work to do." Jax wandered back to the break area, his thoughts churning. The air was heavy with tension, and he could feel it crackling like static electricity. The Slarv's decree had turned the colony into a pressure cooker, and he had a sinking feeling it was only a matter of time before someone blew their top. As if on cue, an alarm blared, the sound harsh and unforgiving. Miners dropped their tools and looked to Tressa, who was already in motion, barking orders into her comlink. "What now?" Ludo asked, eyes scanning the tunnels nervously. "Trouble," Jack said, tightening his grip on his pickaxe. "The fun never stops around here." Tressa's voice crackled over the intercom. "All right, everyone, we've got a breach in Sector 7. Get your gear and move out. Let's show these bastards we won't go down without a fight." Jax exchanged a glance with Ludo. "Guess that's our cue." "Looks like it," Ludo agreed, hefting his axe with a grim smile. "Time to show the Slarv what humanity's made of." And as they moved to confront yet another threat, Jax couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of the end. An end that might come with a bang, a whimper, or, in true Jax style, a sarcastic remark. As they suited up and headed to the breach, the weight of the Slarv's decree hung over them like a guillotine. But beneath that fear there was a spark, a glimmer of defiance that even the Slarv couldn't extinguish. "Everyone ready?" Tressa barked as the group gathered near the tunnel's entrance. There was a chorus of nods, the miners' faces set with determination. "Ready as we'll ever be," Jax called out, trying to inject some levity into the tension. The tunnel leading to Sector 7 was silent, save for the heavy thud of their boots on the metal grating. The air felt different here, charged with something Jax couldn't quite put his finger on. Maybe it was the promise of the unknown, or perhaps just the smell of ozone from the Slarv's gadgets. The breach itself was a mess, a gaping hole in the side of the tunnel wall. Rocks and dust littered the ground, and a faint hissing sound filled the air. "Damn, looks like a drill malfunction," Ludo muttered, kneeling to examine the debris. Tressa nodded. "Or sabotage. Either way, we need to fix it before the Slarv decide to investigate." Jax felt a chill run down his spine. "Sabotage. You think someone's trying to stir the pot?" "Could be," Tressa said. "Or it could just be bad luck, but we can't take any chances." They set to work, patching the breach with practiced efficiency. Jax's hands moved on autopilot, his mind racing with the implications. If someone was sabotaging the colony, it could mean disaster, or it could mean the rumblings of resistance. "Keep an eye out for any equipment malfunctions," Tressa advised as they finished the repairs. "We can't afford any more slip-ups." "Got it," Jax said, glancing around the tunnel. "And if I see anything suspicious, I'll let you know." "Good," Tressa replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "We need to stick together now more than ever." As they made their way back to the main tunnels, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing. The Slarv's oppressive rule had pushed them to the brink, and something had to give. The miners returned to their stations, the breach now just another story to add to the growing list of grievances. But beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of defiance, a whispered promise that they wouldn't go down without a fight. In the days that followed, the Slarv's presence loomed larger than ever. Drones buzzed through the corridors with increased frequency, their mechanical eyes ever watchful. The miners moved with caution, their words carefully chosen lest they find themselves on the receiving end of the Slarv's re-education. Jax found himself speaking less and listening more, tuning into the growing unrest among his fellow miners. The decree had transformed their world, stifling any semblance of normalcy. But it had also ignited a spark, a desire to push back against the alien overlords who sought to crush them under their heel. As he sat in the mess hall one evening, picking at his dinner of nutrient paste, Jax glanced around at the weary faces surrounding him. They were tired, yes, but there was something else there too, an unspoken determination. Tressa approached him, setting her own tray down with a dull thud. "How's morale?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes searching. "Could be better, could be worse," Jax replied, taking a sip of water. "Everyone's on edge, but I think they are ready." "Ready for what?" Tressa inquired, raising an eyebrow. Jax leaned in, lowering his voice. "Ready to fight back. The Slarv can't keep us under their thumb forever, not if we stand together." Tressa nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "We'll have to be careful. One wrong move and they'll come down on us hard." "Yeah, but what else is new?" Jax said with a wry smile. "We've been surviving under their noses for this long. I think we can handle whatever they throw at us." As they finished their meal, the unspoken agreement between them solidified. The Slavs' decree had pushed them to their limits, but it had also revealed their strength. A strength that, if nurtured, could turn the tide in their favor. And as the days wore on, Jax and his fellow miners moved with renewed purpose. The Slavs' decree might have been intended to break their spirit, but all it had done was forge a bond that was stronger than ever. In the shadows of the lunar colony, a quiet rebellion simmered, waiting for the moment when it could finally come to a boil. The lunar colony's break room had seen better days. The walls were a dull gray, like someone had forgotten to paint them with hope. The overhead lights flickered with the enthusiasm of a half-dead firefly, casting sickly shadows over the huddle of miners gathered around the table. Jax slouched in his chair, stirring a cup of something that might have once resembled coffee if you squinted real hard and denied reality. "All right, listen up," Jax said, leaning forward with the gravitas of a man who was about to say something monumentally stupid or monumentally brilliant. "We need to get creative." "Creative?" Ludo snorted, tossing a small rock from hand to hand like it might do a trick if he stared hard enough. "The last guy who got creative ended up as Slav fertilizer." "True," Jax conceded, nodding. "But he also couldn't count to 10 without using his fingers, so maybe we're a step ahead." Tressa, ever the figure of authority, stood leaning against the door frame, her arms crossed. She looked like she might roll her eyes into the next dimension. "Please tell me there's a point to this gathering." "There is," Jax said, spreading his hands in what he hoped was an inviting gesture. "We're going to start communicating in code." "Code?" Tressa's skepticism could have been cut with a blunt spoon. "You mean like those conspiracy nuts on the ancient internet?" "Exactly," Jax grinned. "Except instead of talking about alien lizards controlling the government, we'll be discussing, actual alien overlords." "And how do you propose we do this without getting ourselves spaced?" Ludo asked, the rock now forgotten. Jax tapped his temple. "By hiding messages in plain sight. We keep conversations looking mundane, but there's a hidden meaning." "Great," Tressa muttered. "We're going to die because someone misinterprets pass the salt as start the revolution." "Not if we're smart about it," Jax replied, undeterred. "We use phrases we naturally say all the time, like if I say the cough is cold, it means we meet in the West Tunnel." "And if someone actually just wants coffee?" Ludo asked. "Then they're out of luck because that sludge is never warm," Jax quipped. The room buzzed with a mixture of nerves and excitement. It was a plan born out of desperation, a shaky, improbable plan, but it was something. And something in their current predicament was better than nothing. Tressa sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "All right, but if this goes wrong, I don't know any of you." "Deal," Jax said with a sardonic grin. "But if it works, you can say it was your idea." "I'll pass on the glory," Tressa shot back, "and the execution that comes with it." As the miners filtered back to their duties, the weight of their subterfuge added a new layer to their daily routine. Conversations turned into games of verbal chess, each move calculated to maintain the facade. In the tunnels, Jax found himself paired with Ludo, working side by side in a rhythm more familiar than comforting. The clang of pickaxes on rock was the colony's heartbeat, a steady, unyielding reminder of their cage. "So, how's the family?" Jax asked, in what was now part of their coded lexicon. In this instance, family referred to the Slav Guard's patrol schedule. "Same old," Ludo replied, picking at a particularly stubborn rock. "They're predictable, never change their routines." "Good. Consistency was their friend, like a bad penny that kept showing up just when they needed it." Meanwhile, Tressa had her own fires to put out. The Slav's expectations were a noose around her neck, tightened by the declining productivity reports that landed on her desk with the regularity of a death sentence. In the control room, she stared at the screens, the green lines of data blurring into a single, depressing truth. They were falling behind. And the Slav, ever the merciful overlords, wouldn't hesitate to make an example of them. "Problems, boss?" Jax's voice crackled over the comlink, an intrusion she welcomed more than she'd admit. Just the usual, she replied, keeping her tone light, trying to avoid our imminent doom. Well, if it makes you feel better, Ludo and I just had a thrilling conversation about his family. Oh, great, Tressa sighed. How are they? Stuck in their routine, predictably, Jax said. Think they'll be attending our next, family dinner. Only if we screw up, Tressa replied, rubbing her temples. We need to pick up the pace. The Slarv are watching our numbers like hawks, or maybe like vultures, Jax suggested, waiting to see who drops dead first. Cheerful thought, Tressa said dryly. But I've got faith in your ability to keep things. Interesting. Interesting is my middle name, Jax quipped. Thought it was idiot, Ludo interjected, leaning over Jax's shoulder to speak into the comlink. But I guess either works. Thanks for reminding me why I keep you around, Ludo, Jax said, shaking his head as he cut the connection. Despite the levity, the pressure was mounting. Every day the miners were pushed to their limits, prodded by the ever-looming threat of Slarv retribution. And yet, amidst the tension, something else was brewing, an undercurrent of unity, woven through their shared frustration and hope. In the subsequent days, their coded messages spread like a virus, the good kind, the kind that didn't send you to the infirmary with a bad case of being dead. Soon even the quietest miners were in on it, their mundane chatter a tapestry of rebellion. Weather's looking weird today, someone would say, meaning the drones were acting suspicious. Yeah, but at least the sun's shining, another would reply, indicating a clear path for their plans. It was a gamble, a tightrope walk over a pit of very literal snakes. Tressa, caught between maintaining order and nurturing this burgeoning resistance, found herself juggling more balls than a circus performer after a 3-martini lunch. She called another meeting, this time in a storeroom that smelled like despair and cleaning solvent. "All right, everyone, listen up," she said, her voice a whip crack in the dimly lit room. "Our numbers are down, and if we don't fix it, the Slarv will do something we'll all regret. They're not known for their forgiving nature." Jax raised an eyebrow. "You mean they'll stop being so warm and fuzzy?" "Exactly," Tressa replied, deadpan. "So, we need ideas. And preferably ones that won't get us all spaced. How about we stage a distraction?" Ludo suggested, ever the optimist when it came to harebrained schemes. "Something to throw them off while we boost production numbers." "And you're volunteering to be the distraction?" Jax asked, smirking. "Hey, I'm crazy, not suicidal," Ludo retorted. "But maybe we can use the drones against them. Send them on wild goose chases while we get our act together." Tressa considered this, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "It's risky, but it could work. The drones are programmed to follow certain triggers. If we could hack into their systems, send them false signals. Then we might buy ourselves some time," Jax finished, nodding. "But who's gonna pull it off?" Ludo asked. "We're miners, not hackers. Leave that to me," Tressa said. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." The plan was set, a precarious balance between desperation and genius. As the days stretched on, the colony buzzed with a new sense of urgency. Miners worked double shifts, their exhaustion rivaled only by their determination. Jax found himself in the thick of it, his hands blistered, his back aching. But he pushed through, spurred on by the flicker of rebellion that burned brighter with each passing day. In the evenings, when the colony's hum quieted to a dull roar, Jax would find Tressa in the control room, surrounded by screens and cables, her gaze fixed on the future. "We're close," she said one night, not looking up from her work. "Close to what?" Jax asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Victory or disaster. Could be either," Tressa admitted with a tired smile. "But I'm hoping for something in between." "We'll make it happen," Jax said confidently, though the knots in his stomach told a different story. "Thanks," Tressa replied, her voice softer. "For what it's worth, you've become a pretty decent leader." "Don't spread that around," Jax said with mock horror. "I've got a reputation as a screw-up to maintain." As they shared a rare moment of camaraderie, the weight of their circumstances momentarily lifted. They were in this together, and together they might just stand a chance. But the clock was ticking, and the Slavs' patience was as thin as the air outside their lunar prison. Every step forward felt like walking a razor's edge, the threat of discovery ever present. Yet in the shadows of the colony, their rebellion grew. What started as whispered conversations had blossomed into a network of defiance, a testament to the indomitable human spirit. Jax glanced at Tressa, seeing in her the same determination that fueled him. They were an unlikely pair, bound by circumstance and the common goal of survival. "Ready for another round?" he asked, his tone light despite the gravity of their mission. Tressa nodded, her eyes reflecting the flicker of hope they'd nurtured against all odds. "Always." And so they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that while the Slav held the cards, the miners had something far more valuable: the will to fight back, the courage to dream of freedom, and the audacity to believe that even in the darkest of places, the light of rebellion could shine through. The lunar colony's break room was bustling with the usual brand of exhausted camaraderie. Miners nursed their mugs of lukewarm sludge, more as a comfort than a caffeine fix. The walls, a dismal shade of gray, seemed to absorb the weary sighs of its occupants. But today, there was an extra layer to the usual monotony: paranoia. Jack sat at the corner table, flipping through a dog-eared manual that had long since ceased to be relevant. Across from him, Ludo fiddled with a spoon like a kid trying to keep himself entertained during a long, boring sermon. "You hear the latest?" Ludo asked, voice low. "The Slav ramped up their surveillance, got drones buzzing around like they own the place." "That's because they do, technically," Jax replied, not looking up. "And they don't just buzz around. They hover like vultures eyeing roadkill." "Yeah, well, someone must have slipped up. I heard they caught wind of our little operation." Jax closed the manual with a thud. "Just great. We can't have a revolution without some hiccups, right?" "Maybe they misheard pass the salt as pass the dynamite," Ludo joked, though his eyes were anything but amused. "Or maybe someone was just dumb enough to try and order actual coffee." Their banter was cut short as Tressa entered the room, her presence as commanding as ever, like a school teacher who was done playing nice. The conversations around them hushed, miners instinctively recognizing the change in atmosphere. "Listen up," she said, "no time for pleasantries. Our friends, the Slav, are onto us. They've increased their patrols and their drones are now taking selfies with our faces. This isn't good." "Well, I always wanted to be famous," Ludo quipped. "Just not in the wanted dead or alive kind of way." Tressa shot him a look that could freeze a sun. "We've got to be careful. If the Slav even sniff a hint of rebellion, we're done for." "Then what do you suggest?" Jax asked, leaning back in his chair, feigning nonchalance. "Because our plan's already rolling and it's not exactly subtle. We need to tighten our circle," she insisted. "There are too many people talking and we can't afford loose lips." "Loose lips get us all spaced," Jax agreed. "So who's gonna be the one to play bad cop?" "I will," Tressa replied without hesitation. "But we need to address the bigger issue. Some of you are starting to doubt the plan. Now's not the time for cold feet." A murmur spread through the room, dissent simmering beneath the surface. They were miners, not soldiers, but the desperation of their situation had left them with little choice. Ludo snorted. "We didn't sign up for this, Tressa. Mining's bad enough without worrying about getting vaporized by angry overlords." Jax chimed in. "We all knew the risks when we started. But it's either this or we keep scraping by under the Slav's thumb until we're literally dust." A voice piped up from the back. "And what if this all goes south? What's the backup plan?" "Backup plan?" Jax echoed, brow furrowing. "You mean aside from dying quietly in our sleep?" Tressa slammed her hand on the table, silencing the room. "No one's dying. Not if we stay smart about this and keep our heads down. But we can't have anyone second-guessing and jeopardizing what we've built." There was a heavy pause as her words sank in, each syllable a stone thrown into a pool of doubt, creating ripples of uncertainty. "Fine," Ludo conceded, albeit grudgingly. "I'm in, but if this goes south, I'm blaming Jax." "Fair enough," Jax said with a wry smile. Just make sure you spell my name right in the history books. The meeting dissolved, miners returning to their stations with renewed resolve, a grim determination in their eyes. But the tension remained, a silent specter hanging over them. In the tunnels, Jax and Ludo resumed their shifts, the rhythmic clang of pickaxes echoing like a heartbeat. Each swing was a prayer for sanity, each grunt an acknowledgement of their precarious position between rock and hard vacuum. "So," Ludo began, breaking the silence, "I hear Tressa's planning to hack the drones." "You think she can pull it off? She says she's got tricks up her sleeve," Jax replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "And if anyone can outwit the Slarv, it's her." "Still, it's risky as hell," Ludo said. "What if they catch on?" Jax paused, the weight of the question lingering in the stale, recycled air. "Then we improvise, we're miners. Making do with what little we have is practically in our job description." "Yeah, well, I'd prefer not to make do with a Slarv death ray, thanks," Jax shrugged. "Could be worse. They could bore us to death with more of their decrees." Their banter was interrupted by the sudden, jarring screech of the colony's automated announcement system. The cheerful tone felt like nails on a chalkboard. "Attention, esteemed workers," the voice chirped with false enthusiasm. "Our benevolent overseers remind you that productivity is key to harmony. Keep up the good work." "Is it just me, or does that thing sound more ominous every day?" Ludo asked. "That's because it is," Jax muttered, resuming his work. "Or maybe we're just getting better at recognizing BS." Meanwhile, Tressa was knee-deep in unauthorized algorithms, her workspace a chaotic mess of wires and screens. Every keystroke was a gamble, each line of code a step closer to either salvation or doom. She'd spent enough time studying the drones, their patterns, their annoyingly efficient programming. Now all she had to do was convince them to take a holiday, preferably far away from the colony. "Hey, Tressa," Jax's voice crackled through her comlink. "Everything good on your end?" "Define good," she replied, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Well, we're still breathing, so that's something," Jax said. "And how's the hacking going?" "Like building a spaceship with duct tape and dreams," Tressa replied. "But if this works, we'll have a clear path for our next moves. And if it doesn't, then Ludo gets his wish and blames you for everything," Jax chuckled. "Wouldn't have it any other way." As the days wore on, the colony became a hive of clandestine activity. The rebellion's momentum was undeniable, its numbers swelling as more colonists joined the cause, driven by desperation and the slimmest hope of change. They were a ragtag crew, but they'd become a force to be reckoned with. But as with any good story, it wasn't long before someone threw a wrench into the gears. A misstep, an accidental slip of the tongue, and suddenly their carefully constructed web of deceit was exposed. It happened during a routine inspection, one of those tedious procedures everyone loathed. A Slarv guard, sharp-eyed and suspicious, overheard a miner making an ill-timed joke about a family dinner. The kind of joke that, under normal circumstances, would have been laughed off, but there was nothing normal about their circumstances. Reports of the incident reached Tressa in record time, her heart sinking as she pieced together the implications. If the Slarvs suspected even a fraction of their plans, they were all as good as dead. A meeting was called, this time in a half-finished maintenance bay, the echoing hum of machinery a constant backdrop. "We've got a problem," Tressa announced, pacing like a general without an army. "The Slarv are onto us. They intercepted some of our coded talk during the inspection." Groans and curses filled the room. "All it takes is one slip," Jax said, shaking his head. "Just one." "So what do we do?" a miner asked, eyes wide with fear. "We can't just stop now, they'll know something's up." "Exactly," Tressa agreed. "Which is why we need to act fast. We have to double down, make them think we're still in the dark." "And how do we do that?" Ludo inquired, skepticism etched on every word. "We take a calculated risk," she replied. "We give them just enough to keep them busy while we finalize the real plan." Jax nodded, understanding the weight of the decision. "It's risky, but it's our best shot." "And if they catch on?" Ludo asked. "Then we improvise," Jax said with a tight smile. "Like always." Their resolve was tested in the hours that followed. The Slarv, now suspicious, increased their patrols, their drones scrutinizing every shadow, every movement. The miners worked under a blanket of tension, their every breath a potential betrayal. But amidst the fear, there was also a steely determination. They'd come too far to turn back now, their rebellion a spark that refused to be snuffed out. In the control room, Tressa's fingers danced over the keyboard, each keystroke a calculated risk. The drone's patterns flashed across her screens, their paths forming a web of surveillance that had to be unraveled. Jax, hovering nearby, watched with a mixture of awe and anxiety. "You sure about this?" he asked. Tressa spared him a glance. "Sure as I'll ever be." "Well, if it all goes to hell, at least we'll have a front row seat," she snorted. Comforting thought, but if we pull this off, it'll be worth it. "Yeah," Jax agreed, clinging to the hope like a lifeline. "Let's give them one hell of a show." As the colony's lights flickered in the artificial night, the rebels braced for the storm they'd summoned. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time in a long time, they had something worth fighting for. The colony's atmosphere was tense enough to strangle a person without the need for vacuum exposure. The Slarv had decided to make an example of their benevolent rule by dragging away several key figures from the rebellion's ranks. Jax found himself in a particularly charming cell, with decor reminiscent of a junkyard, rusted metal, flickering lights, and a stench that could offend a skunk. He sat on a bed that felt like it was made from the least forgiving rocks of the moon, watching the door as if expecting it to grow a mouth and start spouting insults. Beside him, two fellow captives, Cass and Nico, were already deep in a game of count the ceiling cracks, a pastime only marginally better than existential dread. "Well, I always wanted a vacation," Jax quipped, breaking the silence. "Just didn't picture it involving bars and bad company." Cass snorted, tossing a pebble at the wall. "I don't know, Jax. These accommodations are 5-star compared to my last digs." Nico shook his head, his enthusiasm about as alive as the cold lunar landscape. "Guess we should be thankful they didn't throw us into a Slarv recycling vat." "Small mercies," Jax agreed, scratching at the grime on his face. "But let's not lose hope. Maybe they'll let us out for good behavior. Or at least for bad jokes." Meanwhile, back in the colony, Tressa was stuck on the horns of a particularly thorny dilemma. The Slarv had made it crystal clear that any further resistance would be met with extreme prejudice, and not the kind that comes with a raised eyebrow and a sarcastic comment. In her private quarters, a clutter of monitors and half-finished gadgets surrounded her. Each screen showed different angles of the colony, their oppressive gray and yellow Slarv banners fluttering with all the joy of a funeral procession. She chewed on the end of a stylus, deep in thought. "Damn it, Jax," she muttered to the empty room, as if the walls might offer some sage advice. "Why'd you have to be such a blabbermouth?" Deep down, she knew she was clutching at straws. The Slarv's crackdown was inevitable, like gravity or regrettable fashion choices. Still, the thought of sacrificing her friends, her people, gnawed at her like a particularly persistent rodent. An alert flashed on her central monitor. She leaned forward, recognizing the encrypted message. It was from one of their few remaining insiders still outside the Slarv's reach. "Gotta move fast. Morale's tanking. Bugs everywhere." Literally, it read. She sighed and ran a hand through her hair. The colony was indeed on the brink, and all they had left was a few disgruntled miners and a morale that seemed to be in freefall. Back in the cell, Jax was busying himself with a monologue, both to keep spirits up and to distract from the fact that they'd probably be dead by the week's end. "So, what's the plan, folks?" "We bust out, take over the colony, and then maybe form a rock band." Cass laughed, the sound hollow but genuine. "Sure, and we can call ourselves the Moonstruck, our first hit single, Slarv Sucks." Nico, who'd been silent for a while, finally spoke up. What if this is it? We don't get out of this and they just erase us. Then we become legends," Jax said without missing a beat. "Our rebellion will be the bedtime story parents tell their kids to keep them from acting out." Yeah, right, Nico replied. Like anyone's gonna remember us. Jax leaned back, a slightly mad glint in his eyes. Oh, they'll remember. We'll make sure of that. Meanwhile, Tressa was facing a decision that could very well tip the scales. She could either comply with the Slav, hoping for leniency that history suggested wouldn't come, or she could risk everything, her life, her people's lives, for a chance at freedom. It was the kind of choice that would give any half-sane person migraines. But then, Tressa wasn't fully sane anymore. Nobody who'd spent as much time as she had under the Slav's boot could claim that. Her comlink buzzed, yanking her out of her spiraling thoughts. It was Ludo. "Hey, boss," he said, his voice unusually serious. "You all right?" "Peachy," she replied, sarcasm dripping like toxic sludge. "How's the mood out there?" "Bad," Ludo admitted. "Real bad. Folks are talking about giving up, turning themselves in, figuring the Slav might go easy on them." Tressa's jaw tightened. "They won't. We both know how this ends if we don't see it through." "Yeah, I know," Ludo said. "But people are scared, and scared people do stupid things." "Tell them to hold on a bit longer," she said, determination creeping back into her voice. "I've got a plan, not a great one, but it's something." A pause, then Ludo chuckled. "You know, Jax always said you were stubborn enough to move mountains." "Let's hope he was right." "Let's hope," she echoed, hanging up. Alone once more, with only her wavering resolve for company. In the cell, Jax had taken to regaling his fellow prisoners with tales of their previous escapades, stories full of mishaps, narrow escapes, and enough bad decisions to fill a self-help book on what not to do. "And then, of course," Jax was saying, "we found out the hard way that the Slav don't take kindly to practical jokes." "Who knew they had no sense of humor?" Cass snickered, while Nico leaned against the wall, listening intently. "So what happened next?" "Well, next thing I knew, we were knee-deep in Slav paperwork. Turns out they're big on bureaucracy." "Who'd have thought aliens would be so fond of red tape?" Cass shook her head, grinning. "You're a lunatic, Jax." "Maybe," Jax agreed, "but I'm your lunatic." The cell door clanked open and a figure stepped in. It was Gregor, one of the guards who had a reputation as being less of a sadist than his colleagues. Not exactly a glowing endorsement, but then they weren't exactly spoiled for choice. "All right, you lot," Gregor said, sounding as bored as he was threatening. "On your feet. Boss wants a word." Jax exchanged a look with Cass and Nico, a silent conversation passing between them. "This is it." They were led through the labyrinthine corridors, past more cells filled with equally despondent miners, all of whom wore expressions ranging from despair to grim determination. Finally, they were brought to a room that was depressingly familiar, Tressa's makeshift command center. She was there, looking a little worse for wear, but with a fire in her eyes that hadn't been snuffed out yet. "Glad you could join us," she said, nodding at Gregor, who wisely decided to wait outside. Jax stepped forward, a crooked smile on his face. "Couldn't let you have all the fun without us." "Got a plan?" Cass asked, cutting straight to the point. "Something like that," Tressa replied. "But I need you all on board." Nico raised an eyebrow. "What's the catch?" "The catch," Tressa said, "is that it involves a bit of theater. We're going to fake a compliance order, a complete surrender. Offer the Slav some bait while we set up the real plan in motion." Jax crossed his arms, considering. "Gotta say I like it, playing dead to catch the vulture." Cass nodded, her face a mix of hope and skepticism. "And if it doesn't work, then we improvise," Tressa answered. "But we make damn sure we go out swinging." A grim silence followed, each of them contemplating the stakes. But there was a flicker of something else too, determination, hope, defiance. If they were going to go down, they'd make it a fight to remember. In the end, it was Jax who broke the tension. "Well, if we're going to die, might as well do it in style. Someone pass me a pen. I want to make sure my last words are epic." The plan was set in motion with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. The Slav, never ones to turn down a chance to gloat, quickly accepted the supposed surrender, laying the groundwork for their own undoing. Tressa coordinated their movements with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony of chaos. Each miner had a role, a part to play in the grand deception. It was risky, a gamble that could go belly up with the slip of a tongue or the twitch of a finger. But as they worked, a new energy buzzed through the colony. They were doing something, anything, to fight back. Even the walls seemed to vibrate with the tension of their combined will. The Slavs' response was predictable arrogance and overconfidence. They paraded their victory through the streets, their drones buzzing overhead like a swarm of locusts. As the countdown ticked away, Jax found himself alongside Cass and Nico, waiting in the shadows, hearts pounding like drumbeats. "You ready?" he whispered, glancing at his comrades. Cass nodded. "Let's give him a show they won't forget." Nico cracked his knuckles, face set in grim determination. For the colony, Tressa's voice came through their earpieces, steady and reassuring. "On my mark, 3, 2, 1. Go." What followed was chaos in its purest form. Explosions rocked the colony, the carefully set charges causing controlled havoc. The drones, disoriented by the unexpected assault, buzzed erratically, their programming unable to keep up. As the dust settled, the rebellion surged forward, wielding whatever weapons they could scrounge, pushing back against the Slav with a ferocity born of desperation. Through it all, Jax fought with a reckless abandon, dodging and weaving through the chaos, his mind oddly clear. Cass and Nico were at his side, their expressions mirrored versions of his own resolve. The Slav, caught off guard by the sudden uprising, scrambled to regain control, their ranks wavering under the onslaught. It was in this moment, this maelstrom of violence and defiance, that the rebels found their strength. Against all odds, they were pushing back, carving a path through their oppressors. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about making a stand, about showing the Slav that they wouldn't be broken. And as the battle raged on, hope, a fragile, flickering thing, blazed brightly amidst the darkness. Jax Markov had always considered himself something of an optimist. Sure, he'd spent the last few years mining rock on a moon that had all the charm of a rusty nail, but who needed sunshine when you had fluorescent lighting and the ever-present threat of being turned into alien fertilizer? "Okay, folks," Jax said, gesturing wildly with his spoon as if it were a conductor's baton. "Let's talk escape. I've got a plan, and while it's not exactly foolproof, we're not exactly dealing with a cast of Mensa candidates here, are we?" Ludo looked up from fiddling with his own spoon, his expression one of wary interest mixed with skepticism. "You mean the Slav, right? Not us." "Sure, let's go with that," Jax replied, a grin stretching across his face. "Now, listen up. We've all been working these tunnels long enough to know them better than a drunk knows the way home. We use that to our advantage." Cass was busy picking at a thread on her jumpsuit, her eyes narrowing as she considered Jax's words. "You suggesting we dig our way out? Because if so, I'm gonna need a bigger spoon." "Not exactly," Jax said, leaning in closer as if the walls themselves might be listening. "See, there's this old supply tunnel, long abandoned. Because, management thought it was a great idea to cut corners and let it flood with gas. But I reckon we could make it work for us." Nico, who had been patently ignoring the whole conversation by staring blankly at the opposite wall, finally chimed in. "And how exactly do we get past the drones and the Slav without ending up as a cautionary tale?" "Ah, that's where the genius part comes in," Jax said, tapping the side of his head like he was showing off a particularly valuable melon. "We create a distraction, make him look the other way while we do our thing," Cass snorted. "Let me guess, you want to set the break room on fire, something like that," Jax admitted. "But with more subtlety, maybe a little less explosive death." Ludo nodded slowly, his own crooked smile beginning to form. "I can work with that. Anything to stick it to those alien bastards." Jax looked around at the assembled group, seeing their expressions transform from weary resignation to something resembling hope. "All right," he said, "we've got a plan. Let's make sure it doesn't suck." Meanwhile, Tressa Vin was busy making moves of her own. She'd spent the last few hours buried up to her eyeballs in alien bureaucracy, wading through the kind of paperwork that would make a tax accountant cry. But there was a method to her madness. The Slarv weren't a monolith. Sure, most of them seemed to relish the idea of stomping out humanity like it was a bad rash, but there were others, minor officials mostly, who were starting to worry about what the new decree might mean for the lunar colony's productivity. Because dead miners don't mine and rebellious miners. Even worse. Tressa decided to exploit this little crack in the Slarv armor. She'd reached out to one such official, a Slarv named Frengel, who had hinted at a certain discomfort with the current regime. Not because they cared about human lives, of course, but because they didn't want a labor stoppage ruining their quarterly results. Frengel, Tressa said, the word slipping out of her mouth like a particularly unpleasant bite of food. I need you to understand. If the Slarv don't back off, they're going to find their moon full of angry humans with nothing to lose. Frengel's response was a series of clicks and hisses through the comms link, which translated to, roughly, the leadership is inflexible, but there may be considerations. Considerations, Tressa repeated, rolling her eyes. Look, I don't care what you have to do. Just give us enough breathing room to pull off our plan. You get what you want, we get what we want. Everybody's happy. More clicks, more hisses. Frengel wasn't exactly the picture of decisiveness, but he seemed to be listening, which was a start. Before long, Tressa had secured a tentative agreement, the kind of loose alliance held together by mutual necessity and a shared disdain for the Slarv leadership's latest idiocy. With a plan in place both in the cell and in her communications, Tressa felt a flicker of optimism, if only a small one. She knew the risks. Any wrong move, and they'd all wind up as a cautionary tale for future miners. Back in the cell, Jax was busy running through the logistics of their escape plan, his mind a flurry of potential pitfalls and creative solutions. All right, Ludo, how's our distraction looking? We got enough junk around here to make a scene. Ludo grinned, a devil-may-care glint in his eyes. Oh, you bet. The break room's practically a powder keg. All we need is a spark. Cass was sketching a rough map of the tunnels in the dirt, her breath coming out in determined puffs. Once we make our move, there'll be no turning back. Everyone's got to know their role down to the last detail. Nico was fidgeting beside her, clearly uneasy with the idea of being at the forefront of a plan that could get them all killed. And you're sure this tunnel won't just lead us into a dead end or, a pit of gas? Hey, if we wanted a guarantee, we'd have chosen a profession with a better retirement plan, Jax quipped, patting Nico on the back. We roll the dice and we hope for the best. It's what we're good at. Tressa's voice crackled through the comms, bringing with it an unexpected announcement. We've got a window. The Slarv are shifting patrols to the east sector, right where we're gonna make our move. Jax's heart leapt at the news. Looks like it's now or never, folks. Make sure your shoelaces are tied and let's give him hell. As the group prepared to make their escape, a strange sense of camaraderie began to settle over them. The thought of imminent death had a way of bringing people together, like a particularly intense team-building exercise with no safety net. With a signal from Tressa, who had managed to keep Frengel and his ilk busy with false reports and bureaucratic nonsense, Jax led the charge. They slipped through the corridors, a ragtag group of miners turned revolutionaries, moving with a purpose they hadn't felt in years. The break room was their first stop, a place of countless coffee spills and petty grievances now transformed into the staging ground for their escape. Ludo went to work, setting up his impromptu pyrotechnics with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for a holiday firework display. On Jax's signal, Ludo struck the match, figuratively speaking, and set their distraction in motion. Flames leapt up, licking at the walls with a hungry fury, and alarms began to wail in protest, echoing through the colony like a symphony of chaos. As the Slarv scrambled to respond, drawn like moths to the flame, Jax and his fellow miners slipped into the old supply tunnel. The path was narrow and treacherous, with the ceiling low enough to brush against their heads, but for the first time in a long time, they felt the intoxicating rush of freedom. Cass led the way, her map clutched in hand like a talisman, while Nico and Ludo brought up the rear, their eyes darting nervously to every shadow. Jax stayed in the middle, his mind racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. They moved quickly, adrenaline propelling them forward as they navigated the twists and turns of the tunnel. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of gas, but they pressed on, driven by the promise of something more than the drudgery they'd been consigned to. Finally, they emerged into a cavernous chamber, the far wall lit by a dim shaft of light that filtered in from above. It was the surface of the moon, tantalizingly close, and just as they began to feel the thrill of impending escape, Tressa's voice crackled through the comms once more. "You're almost there," she said, her voice a lifeline in the darkness. "Just a little further. There's a service elevator at the far end. It should take you up to the landing site. From there, it's a quick hop to the secondary shuttle bay." "Got it," Jax replied, the words thick with determination. "See you on the other side, Tressa." The group picked up the pace, their feet pounding against the rough-hewn rock as they closed in on the elevator. The Slarv, perhaps realizing the extent of their mistake, would soon be hot on their heels, but for now they were free. They reached the elevator, a rickety contraption that looked like it had been cobbled together by a drunk mechanic with a grudge. But it was their ticket out, and they weren't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. Jax punched the button with fevered urgency, and the elevator creaked to life, groaning its way upward toward the surface. Each second felt like an eternity, the anticipation stretching taut between them like a wire pulled to its breaking point. As they ascended, Jax allowed himself a moment of reflection. They'd done it, pulled off the impossible with nothing more than grit, guts, and a healthy disregard for personal safety. But the fight wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. When the elevator finally shuddered to a stop, they stepped out onto the lunar surface, the crisp, stark landscape stretching out before them like a blank canvas. The secondary shuttle bay loomed in the distance, a tantalizing promise of salvation. But as they began their final sprint, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that the Slarv wouldn't let them go without a fight. They'd made their choice, drawn their line in the lunar dust, and now it was time to see it through to the end. With Tressa's support and their own stubborn resolve, they'd make sure the Slarv had more than just a rebellion on their hands. They'd have a full-blown revolution. As the first hints of dawn began to pierce the lunar horizon, Jax and his fellow miners raced toward their uncertain future, the taste of freedom sharp and exhilarating on their tongues. And as they ran, one thing was certain: they'd give the Slarv a story worth remembering. The lunar colony echoed with chaos, much like a poorly rehearsed orchestra tuning up for a symphony of disaster. The Slarv were scrambling, trying to contain the mess they hadn't prepared for, and failing spectacularly. Meanwhile, Tressa Vin strode through the corridors with the kind of confidence you'd expect from someone who'd just been told they had a terminal illness, but decided to fight it with diet soda and sheer spite. She was on her way to confront the alien leadership, armed with nothing but a flimsy tablet and a truckload of human tenacity. The plan was audacious, the kind of move that made old military strategists turn in their graves and whisper, "That's gonna get someone killed." But Tressa had a knack for turning the tables, especially when the stakes were as high as they were now. As she entered the Slarv command center, she was greeted by a room full of alien faces, each more disapproving than the last. It was like walking into a family reunion where everyone had forgotten her name, but remembered that she owed them money. Frengel, her reluctant ally amongst the Slarv, stood off to one side, his posture that of a creature who just realized it might have been better off staying in bed that morning. The Slarv hierarchy, a menagerie of scales, slime, and bad attitudes, glared at Tressa with a mix of confusion and contempt. "Ah, Tressa Vin," sneered one of the Slarv, its voice a series of hisses that the translator rendered with all the charm of a malfunctioning blender. "We were expecting you, to comply silently." Tressa flashed a smile that was all teeth and zero warmth. Yeah, well, I guess I missed the memo. Probably got lost in all that mandatory sarcasm filtering you guys are so fond of. She slapped the tablet onto the nearest surface, the screen flickering to life with a presentation that would have made any corporate drone weep with boredom. It detailed the utter disaster the Slavs' decree had become, productivity graphs nosediving like a kamikaze pilot, morale statistics possibly in negative numbers, and a delightful little section on projected rebellion outcomes. The Slav murmured amongst themselves, their leader's skin shifting colors in a way that suggested either intense thought or severe indigestion. Tressa couldn't have cared less which one it was. You see, she continued, leaning on the table with the casual arrogance of someone who had nothing left to lose, your little decree is about as popular as a fart in a spacesuit. My people are angry, and angry people don't work. They break things. Explosive things. Behind her, the comms crackled to life, and Jax's voice filtered through, laden with the kind of bravado only the imminently doomed can muster. Hey Tressa, we're all set up here. Just give us the word and we'll light this joint up faster than a pyromaniac's birthday cake. Tressa rolled her eyes, a half-smile tugging at her lips. Hold your horses, Jax. We're not at the fireworks display just yet. The Slav leader, perhaps sensing the gravity of the situation, leaned forward, its eyes, unsettlingly like pools of motor oil, fixed on Tressa. What is it you propose? Tressa glanced around, theatrically pondering the question as if she'd just been asked to choose between chocolate or vanilla. Simple. You ditch the decree, let us get back to work, and maybe stop treating us like we're one bad day from snapping and painting the walls with alien guts. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to carve into chunks and sell at a discount. Frengel shuffled awkwardly, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, possibly even an asteroid field. Your demands are bold, the leader managed, a ripple of amusement, or was it just gas, passing through its alien features. Not demands, really, Tressa replied, shrugging with the kind of nonchalance that belied the stakes. More of a friendly suggestion. Think of it as a self-help guide to dealing with humans without getting your tentacles singed. The Slav leader considered for a moment, the hisses and clicks of its underlings filling the air with a chaos that made sense only to them. Finally, it spoke, the translator struggling to keep up. We will consider. But know this, Tressa Vin, if this is a trick, the consequences will be dire. Tressa snorted, crossing her arms. Consequences, huh? The only consequences I'm interested in are the ones where we don't all end up as crispy critters. Besides, you can't exactly dock my pay if I'm dead. She turned to leave, keeping her stride even and unhurried, the way you do when you're walking away from a burning building. The comms crackled again as Jax's voice came through, a chuckle evident in his tone. How'd it go, boss? As well as can be expected when you stroll into a room full of aliens and tell them their grand plans got more holes than a cheese grater, she replied, making her way back to the rendezvous point where the miners waited. Meanwhile, Jax and his ragtag crew were hunkered down at the secondary shuttle bay, the adrenaline slowly wearing off and being replaced by the unsettling realization that they were now fugitives. Ludo was pacing, his hands twitching like he was itching to set something on fire again, while Cass was busy fending off Nico's nervous questions with the kind of patience usually reserved for kindergarten teachers and hostage negotiators. Hey, Jax, Ludo whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the nearby machinery. You think she'll pull it off? Jax shrugged, leaning against the cold metal of the bay's entrance. If anyone can sweet-talk those scaly bastards into seeing reason, it's Tressa, and if not, well, at least we'll go out with a bang. Comforting, Cass muttered, glancing over at the others as if gauging their resolve. So what's the backup plan if they don't bite? Plan B involves a lot of running and praying in that order, Jax replied, a wry grin tugging at his lips. But let's hope we don't have to go that route. I left my running shoes back in the cell. The tension was palpable, a living thing that settled over them like an unwelcome guest. They all knew the risks, the knife edge they were walking, but there was a strange sort of peace in the uncertainty. At least they were doing something. A short chime echoed through the bay, a simple sound that cut through the heavy silence like a knife. Jax's comm device lit up, Tressa's voice breaking through with a clarity that was nothing short of miraculous considering their current circumstances. "We're in," she said, the words more a sigh of relief than an announcement. Slarvs agreed to back off, officially at least. "We're clear to head back, and they won't be pulling any trigger-happy stunts." There was a collective exhale, the tension unwinding into shaky smiles and shaky laughter. The kind of laughter that came from realizing you just flipped Death the bird and lived to tell the tale. "Guess we won't need those running shoes after all," Jax murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. With cautious optimism, the group began to make their way back, the journey somehow both quicker and slower than the frantic escape that had brought them here. Every shadow seemed to hold the promise of danger, but for the first time there was something else too, a glimmer of hope. As they arrived back at the colony, the reality of their situation began to set in. The Slarv, it seemed, were true to their word, their patrols noticeably absent, the once oppressive presence reduced to mere curiosity. It was a victory, small and fragile, but a victory nonetheless. Tressa was waiting for them, her expression a mix of relief and pride, the kind of look usually reserved for parents watching their kids graduate or dogs finally learning not to pee on the carpet. "Took your time," she quipped, nodding at Jax and the others. "Yeah, well, we had to stop and smell the moon rocks," Jax replied, grinning. "You pulled it off." "Somehow," Tressa shrugged, her demeanor casual despite the enormity of what they'd just achieved. "Turns out, even alien overlords have a thing for quarterly reports. Who knew?" "Figures," Ludo snorted, shaking his head. All they needed was a reminder that dead workers don't contribute to the bottom line. Amidst the banter and the laughter, there was a new feeling, a sense of camaraderie and purpose that had been absent for so long. They'd stood up, taken a risk, and come out on the other side with their lives, and possibly their dignity, intact. But beneath the surface, each of them knew that this wasn't the end. The struggle against the Slarv was far from over, and there would be more battles to fight, more risks to take. Yet, for the first time, they felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next, ready to defy expectations, ready to be more than just miners in a forgotten corner of space. As the group made their way back into the heart of the colony, Tressa cast a glance at Jax, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear, "this could be the start of something big." Jax nodded, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his fellow miners, the people who had become friends, allies, maybe even family. "Yeah," he agreed, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Let's just hope it doesn't end with us all as fertilizer." With that, they stepped back into the colony, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, determined to keep fighting, keep pushing, keep living. Because at the end of the day, the Slarv might own the moon, but the humans, well, they owned the grit, the guts, and the gall to make something more of it. And that was a start. The lunar colony was beginning to look less like a post-apocalyptic sitcom and more like an actual functioning settlement. Of course, that depended on your definition of functioning. The Slarv patrols had loosened up, though loosened up was relative when it came to a species whose idea of a good time involved watching security footage for kicks. The miners had gone back to digging holes in the ground for rocks that none of them could afford with the wages they were making. But hey, at least they weren't being threatened with an instant conversion to asteroid mulch every other day. Jax Markov leaned back in a chair that squealed like a dying robot, surveying the organized chaos of the rebuilt break room. "Not bad for a bunch of meatbags nobody believed in, huh?" His grin was the kind you'd find on someone who had just survived a near-death experience and was contemplating the absurdity of life. Tressa Vin stood across from him, arms crossed, her expression the perfect blend of hard-earned satisfaction and barely contained sarcasm. "Well, we're still breathing, so that's a start." Though I suspect the Slarv just realized we're more trouble dead than alive. Or maybe they just missed our charming personalities. Jax's eyes twinkled with mischief. Hard not to fall in love with a face like mine. Tressa's snort was as eloquent as any verbal retort. More like they took pity on us. Besides, I think it's the first time we've managed not to blow something up for a whole week. As they bantered, the room buzzed with a newfound energy. Groups of miners clustered around tables, engaged in animated debates over things like tunnel efficiency or whether the Slarv leader had ever cracked a smile. It was a strange scene, considering that a month ago, most of them wouldn't have dared to speak above a whisper for fear of drawing unwanted attention. Cass wandered over, an unlit cigarette dangling from her lips, one of the many rebellious acts that had become commonplace now that the Slarv's grip had loosened. "So what's the plan, fearless leader?" she asked, her voice dripping with all the deference of a cat addressing a particularly stupid mouse. "Plan? I thought our plan was to have no plan," Jax replied, unbothered by the sarcasm. "We're practically trailblazers of disorganization." "Great. A revolution founded on aimless wandering and luck," Cass muttered, rolling her eyes. "Truly inspirational." Nico, ever the skeptic, joined them with a tablet in hand. He waved it around like it was a magic wand that could fix everything. "I hate to be the party pooper, but if we're not careful, we'll end up right back where we started. I've been looking at the numbers, and while it's all rainbows and unicorns now, we need a solid strategy to keep this going." Jax glanced at the screen flashing projections and figures. "Numbers schmumbers, we're still here, aren't we? That's got to count for something." "It counts until it doesn't," Nico shot back, pinching the bridge of his nose. "And I'm guessing the Slarv are just waiting for us to slip up." "You mean besides your fashion sense?" Jax quipped, earning a chuckle from Tressa. The chatter was interrupted by a loud clatter from the table where Frengel sat, the reluctant ally and honorary human in training. He'd managed to spill whatever passed for Slarv coffee all over himself and was now flailing about like a squid at a rave. "This drink is challenge," he managed, each word as labored as if he were hauling moon rocks with his tongue. "Welcome to the pleasures of human beverages," Ludo called out, raising a cup in mock salute. "It grows on you like a fungus, or a bad rash," Cass added, smirking. Frengel's alien features twisted into an approximation of confusion, his attempt at human expression something akin to an octopus trying to recite Shakespeare. "Humans? Strange." Tressa laughed, a sound that was surprisingly light given their circumstances. "And yet you stick around. Must be all that charm we're oozing. Or the smell," Jax offered. "Rarely do you find such a potent mix of sweat and despair." As the laughter subsided, a sense of camaraderie settled over the group, a bond forged in defiance, desperation, and a mutual dislike for their slimy overlords. It was the kind of alliance that only a shared trauma or a particularly bad hangover could inspire. The moon's harsh fluorescent lights flickered, as if reminding them that they hadn't yet managed to fix everything. The air was still thick with the scent of industrial cleaner and the lingering dreams of a million miners who'd come before them. Dreams turned into dust, if you wanted to get poetic about it, which none of them did. "So, Tressa, any pearls of wisdom from our last encounter with the glorious Slarv hierarchy?" Ludo asked, leaning against a table that had seen better days and probably better graffiti. Tressa shrugged, her expression slipping into something dangerously close to genuine contemplation. "Not much, except that even aliens have their breaking points. Push them far enough and they start listening. Or at least pretending to. Guess we're not so different after all," Cass mused, tapping ash into a makeshift ashtray. "Except for the scales and the slime, and the fact that their language sounds like a blender having a stroke," Jax pointed out. "Minor details," Tressa said, the corner of her mouth quirking up. "Anyway, we've got ourselves a bit of breathing room, but we can't let it go to our heads." "Can't let it go to our heads," Jax echoed theatrically. "You're not suggesting we act responsibly, are you? I know it's a terrifying thought, she replied, feigning horror. But if we're going to keep this momentum, we need to be smart, and maybe lay off the explosives for a while. Jax held up his hands in surrender. Fine, fine, you're the boss. Yeah, well, don't let it get around, Tressa said, fixing him with a mock-serious stare. I've got a reputation to maintain as the colony's favorite rebel. The conversation drifted into lighter topics, bad jokes, questionable rumors, and the endless debate over who made the worst food in the galaxy. Yet beneath the banter, there was a shared understanding that the fight was far from over. They'd won a battle, not the war, and each of them knew it. The door to the break room creaked open, and a group of newcomers entered, fresh recruits who had joined the colony after hearing whispers of the miners' rebellion. They brought with them tales of their own struggles under Slav rule, their faces lined with the same hard resilience that had become the unofficial badge of honor for anyone daring to survive in this part of space. Jax watched them with a mix of pride and caution. Looks like we're becoming popular, he remarked, raising an eyebrow. Great, Cass deadpanned. Just what we need. More mouths to feed and entertain. More hands to help dig us out if things go south, Tressa countered, her gaze scanning the room with an appraising eye. As the day wore on, the colony hummed with activity. Repairs were underway, equipment restored to working order, and plans for future ventures began to take shape. The miners moved with a purpose that had been absent for too long, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they'd face down impossible odds and come out the other side. It was a delicate, fragile victory, but it was theirs, and that meant something. In the quiet moments, Jax found himself reflecting on how much had changed. It was strange to think that not so long ago he'd been just another cog in the Slav machine, resigned to a life of monotonous drudgery. Now he was part of something bigger, something that mattered. There was a power in that, a thrill that came from being more than just a miner, being someone who'd taken a stand. A quick glance around the room confirmed he wasn't the only one feeling it. Tressa, with her unwavering determination, Cass with her sardonic wit, Ludo, always ready to dive headfirst into chaos, and even Nico, the eternal pessimist, seemed to have found a spark that refused to be extinguished. There was no telling what the future held. The Slav might change their minds, tighten their grip once more, or they could face new threats, new challenges. But for now, they were alive, they were free, more or less, and they were ready to keep fighting for their place in this universe, one sarcastic remark at a time. As the colony's lights dimmed for the artificial night cycle, Jax and the others lingered in the break room, content to bask in the quiet satisfaction of having taken another step forward. Tressa caught his eye, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Think we'll stick around long enough to see how this all plays out?" she asked, her tone light but carrying an edge of seriousness. "Why not?" Jax replied, leaning back in his chair. "I'm curious to see what happens when you poke the universe one too many times." "Let me guess," Cass chimed in, her voice teasing. "You're hoping it pokes back." "Isn't that the fun part?" Jax said, his grin widening. "Besides, I've got a feeling we're just getting started." And with that, they settled in for the night, the promise of a new day on the moon, with all of its gritty, unpredictable wonder, waiting just beyond the horizon. As they drifted into a restless sleep, each of them dreamed of a future where they'd continue to defy the odds, where their story was far from over. After all, they'd built something here in the shadows of the Slav Empire, something worth fighting for, worth protecting. And in the end, that was more than enough to keep them going.